to decentralize it and have the people who were doing the work actually control their workplaces. And they believed that they could make them more sustainable. Now, did they get the chance to try that, to act on that vision of workers, a worker cooperative economy as the centerpiece of the economy, to have democratic elections, but still have socialism? Did they get that chance when they voted for solidarity? No, they didn't. What they got was an inherited debt, and they were told that the only way that they would get any relief from that debt and any aid is if they followed a very radical shock therapy program. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the person who prescribed that shock therapy program was Jeffrey Sachs. I say that because I really had hoped that we could debate these different worlds, because there are differences. There are real differences that we must not smooth over. Now, in 2006, 40% of young workers in Poland were unemployed, 40% last year. That's twice the EU average. And Poland is often held up as a great success story of transition. In 1989, 15% of Poland's population was living below the poverty line. In 2003, 59% of Poles had fallen below the line. That's that opening of that gap. That's what these economic policies do. And then we can say, we're very, very worried about the people at the bottom. Let's bring them up. But let's be clear about what we're talking about. These jarring levels of inequality and economic exclusion are now feeding a resurgence of chauvinism, racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, rampant homophobia in Poland. And I think we can see, actually, that it's inevitable that this would be the case, because they tried communism, they tried capitalism, they tried democratic socialism, but they got shock therapy instead. After you've tried all that, there really isn't a whole lot left but fascism. It's dangerous to suppress democratic alternatives when people invest their dreams in them. It's risky business. Another one of these powerful dreams was Tiananmen Square, and it's sort of a very sad fluke of history, that on the same day that Solidarity won those historic elections, and that dream was betrayed, what they voted for was betrayed, tanks rolled in Tiananmen Square, and that was the day of the massacre. June 4th, 1989. It was another bloody end to a moment of effervescent possibility. Now, the way those protests were always reported on in the West was that students in Beijing just wanted to live like in the United States, and they put a goddess to democracy that looked a lot like the Statue of Liberty. So it was reported on CNN as just kind of pro-American style democracy protests. But in recent years, an alternative analysis of those events have emerged. And what we're starting to hear from what's being called China's New Left, and people like Wang Hui, who's a wonderful academic, and is that this was a vast oversimplification of what was driving the pro-democracy movement in 1989 in China. What was driving it was that the government of Deng Xiaoping was radically restructuring the economy along the lines that had been prescribed by Milton Friedman, economic shock therapy. And people were seeing their quality of life devalued. Workers were losing their rights, and they were taking to the streets and demanding democratic control over the economic transition. So democracy wasn't an abstract idea. It wasn't just we want to vote. It was we want to control this transition. We want to have a say in it. It was a direct challenge to the Fukuyama formulation, which, by the way, was made that same year. The idea that you could that you would have these two streams and that they wouldn't intersect. I just want to read one other thing, which is another one of these paths not taken. Because we know how that one ended in Tiananmen Square. That dream was crushed. Another historic moment of possibility when we look back on our recent history was 1994, when the ANC government won landslide elections in South Africa. That was a victory for people power. That was one of the most hopeful days that I can remember. I think we should remember what South Africans thought they were voting for in those historic elections. It was just portrayed as something very simple. It was an end to apartheid. But what did an end to apartheid mean to South Africans? And we can get an answer from that, actually from Nelson Mandela, who wrote a little note 2 weeks before he was released from prison. And he wrote this note because there was a growing concern that he'd been in prison so long that he had forgotten the promise of liberation, which was not just to have elections, but to change the economy of the country and redistribute the wealth. And Mandela was under so much pressure that he had to release this very short statement just to clarify this point. And what he said was, the nationalization of the mines, banks, and monopoly industry is the policy of the ANC. And the change or modification of our views in this regard is inconceivable. In our situation, state control of certain sectors of the economy is unavoidable. And this was a reiteration of South Africa's Freedom Charter, which is the platform of the ANC, which calls for the national wealth of South Africa, the heritage of the country, to be restored for the people, the mineral wealth, and so on. Now, I say this because this was one of those worlds that wasn't chosen, one of those paths that wasn't chosen. And I've spent the past 4 years pulling these stolen and betrayed alternatives out of the dustbin of our recent history because I think it matters. I think it matters that we had ideas all along, that there were always alternatives to the free market. And we need to retell our own history and understand that history. And we have to have all the shocks and all the losses of lives in that story. Because history didn't end. There were alternatives. They were chosen, and then they were stolen. They were stolen by military coups. They were stolen by massacres. They were stolen by trickery, by deception. They were stolen by terror. We who say we believe in this other world need to know that we are not losers. We did not lose the battle of ideas. We were not outsmarted, and we were not out-argued. We lost because we were crushed. Sometimes we were crushed by army tanks, and sometimes we were crushed by think tanks. And by think tanks, I mean the people who are paid to think, by the makers of tanks. Now, most effective we have seen is when the army tanks and the think tanks team up. The quest to impose a single world market has casualties now in the millions, from Chile then to Iraq today. These blueprints for another world were crushed and disappeared because they are popular and because, when tried, they work. They're popular because they have the power to give millions of people lives of dignity, with the basics guaranteed. They are dangerous because they put real limits on the rich, who respond accordingly. Understanding this history, understanding that we never lost the battle of ideas, that we only lost a series of dirty wars, is key to building the confidence that we lack, to igniting the passionate intensity that we need.
Naomi Klein, author of the forthcoming book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. You can get a copy at our website, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.